Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we're presenting a 1960 student thesis film, but it's a student thesis film that tells us a great deal about the career of a man who made it, Andrei Tarkovsky, arguably the greatest of all Russian filmmakers since Sergei Eisenstein. The film is called The Steamroller and the Violin and is about the unlikely friendship between a worker and a young boy being tracked for a career as a violinist in 1960 Moscow. We'll be talking about this film as a predictor of much that we would see in Tarkovsky later in his career, and also as a product of Soviet culture around 1960. Joining us again will be Professor Louis Menashe from Polytechnic University, a noted expert on Russian film. Now, take this opportunity to be introduced to the world of Andrei Tarkovsky with The Steamroller and the Violin. Welcome back to City Cinematheque, and welcome back to a kingdom largely disappeared, the Moscow of 1960s, and a whole film world that was portraying the Soviet version of itself. Also, this is a film of great interest, obviously, because it's the first film directed exclusively by Andrei Tarkovsky. Happily, for the next 30 minutes, we can discuss these things with a returning friend to City Cinematheque, Professor Louis Menashe from Polytechnic University in Brooklyn. Professor Menashe is a specialist in Russian history and Russian film.
And Soviet history. Remember the Soviet Union?
Oh, I remember them, yeah. Yeah, there was a guy pounding a shoe on a...
he was one of those guys.
He was one of those guys.
Right.
In addition, his interest in writing about film show up in the fact that he's an associate editor of Cineast magazine, which is concerned with all kinds of relations between film, history, and politics.
Very good.
I knew that. That was going to be the last word, Lou.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a pleasure to be here again. And once again, congratulations. Your programming is impeccable.
Well, thanks.
This is a little-known film of Tarkovsky's, Little Scene, and I'm happy that your viewers are going to take a look at it.
Good. So let's talk, they've just seen the film, so let's talk about the context that this film comes out of. I mean, Tarkovsky's a young man making this. This is the first film on his own. It's a form that virtually doesn't exist for us anymore. It's a medium-length film. It's not a feature film. It's
45 minutes, right.
45 minutes long. So what's this moment in Soviet filmmaking that he's entering?
Well, it's a very important moment. You might say he's a child of the 60s, and the 60s was a very important period, and people refer to themselves as the 60s generation. This comes after the Khrushchev revelations at the 20th Party Congress. It comes during the period of de-Stalinization, where there is an explosion, really, of feeling in the arts, especially. For film, it was extraordinarily important. Tarkovsky did not intend to be a filmmaker originally. He studied art and music, did a stint in Siberia with a geological expedition, and then he decides to do film, and he enrolls at the famous Moscow Institute known as VGIK. And there he studies with venerable director Mikhail Rom, known for his generosity and his humanism. And he makes, before Steamroller and Violin, he makes 3 very short films, like nine-minute films. And the first one is, interestingly enough, The Killers, based on the Hemingway story. And I don't think he had seen the American Sioudbach version. And the only way I think you can see anything of that film, unless you go to Moscow and consult some film archives, is through Chris Marker's wonderful documentary film on Tarkovsky called One Day in the Life of Andrei Arsenovich.
Have I got some news for you?
Yeah.
Have I got some news for you? The Criterion Collection, which is this distinguished selection of world cinema that puts out definitive editions supervised by filmmakers, has a double edition of The Killers. Now, it's the two feature-length films by Robert Siodmak and Don Siegel. And in the special features of adaptations, Disc 1, Siodmak's The Killers, is the complete version of Tarkovsky's The Killer.
All 9 minutes of it, or
all 9 minutes of it.
That's fantastic. I got to see that, actually. And one of the interesting things about that excerpt that is in the Chris Marker film is that Tarkovsky himself appears in the film, right? So, you know, you can place him in the context of this explosion of Soviet cinema and the arts in general, but still he's Tarkovsky. And what Solzhenitsyn said about Sakharov, I think, applies to Tarkovsky. A miracle. He's a miracle. The Steamroller and Violin, I think you can identify it with so many of the films that were made in the late 50s and 60s. It deals with humans. It doesn't deal with heroic figures from the past. It doesn't deal with Stalin. There are no overt, strong political themes and so on. And yet, there are all the Tarkovskian elements, almost from the very beginning of the film. He stands alone. It's an extraordinary phenomenon. In the interstices of Soviet totalitarianism, there emerged this figure, Tarkovsky. In another area, Sakharov, and yet another area, Solzhenitsyn. And this is somewhat miraculous. And
I think it's worth just mentioning a couple of the other titles that people would look for that are the non-Tarkovsky films of this era that circulated very, very broadly and were seen, very everywhere in the world and remain available today. That would include, I'm thinking of, and please add to my list if you wish, but I'm thinking of Ballad of a Soldier.
Of course.
And The Cranes Are Flying.
And most notably, the Soviet war film comes into its own in this period. And it's again about real people and real emotional relationships and so on. And Tarkovsky, of course, I think someone said that every Soviet director wants to make a film about the Second World War, the great patriotic war of the Soviet Union, which was an extraordinary traumatic event on a scale never before seen and I hope never again relived. Tarkovsky, too, makes a film about the war, but again in a Tarkovskian way, and that is, of course, Ivan's childhood. And the elements of Tarkovsky are there ahead of the notion of Soviet patriotism, really. It's, of course, accepted by the Soviet authorities as a film extolling the effort of Soviet citizens in the war, especially these young scouts. Speaking of Ivan's childhood now, the young scout who goes behind enemy lines to determine what the Germans are doing. So there is that element there that is acceptable to the authorities, but there are so many other things in it that are strange, and by comparison to Ballad of a Soldier, for example, the shots of the swamps and the water being one of the characteristic markers of a Tarkovsky film. And let's just say that if ever the truth of the auteur theory is borne out, it's with Tarkovsky. You can always tell a Tarkovsky film. And we see it, we see it in gestation, let us say, in the Steamroller and the Violin.
Let's talk for a minute about let's go to the gestation, but before that, let's talk about what I'll call the conservative or traditional elements of the Steamroller and the Violin. To what degree does the film sort of conform to the norms of what acceptable art is at that moment?
Well, it's a rather straightforward story. I think of all of Tarkovsky's films, which are known to be difficult, this is the most accessible. Boy meets Steamroller, you might say, or Violin meets Steamroller. And it's interesting that the title of the film is Violin and Steamroller rather than Boy and Worker or something like that. It's a straightforward narrative, much influenced, I think, by the French film The Red Balloon in so many ways, both stylistically and in content. And it's humanistic. It shows sympathy for the underdog. The kid is razzed by his friends.
Right.
And, you know, these are all good Soviet values. And in fact, you might even say, even though Tarkovsky had a very, very rough time in the Soviet film establishment, the films that he generated did not violate Soviet norms. They're humanistic, they're concerned with the spirit, they're concerned with human relationships and so on. He did them in a very, very odd way, and that's what threw off the film bosses.
Right.
But anyway, in the film The Steamroller and The Violin, there is that quality that you see so much in Soviet films, a sort of humanistic quality, a no-nonsense quality, an attempt to show the goodness of people. Mm-hmm. I think these were Soviet elements. And within that framework, he introduces what I would call the Tarkovskian elements,
okay.
Which you see almost from the very, very beginning of the film. The boy, and sympathy for the child is a Tarkovskian element. And most of his films, most of his 7 films,
right.
It's a small output given the conditions he worked under, deal with children in one way or another.
Right, absolutely.
And here he has this kid who's bullied by the local other kids who taunt him for being a musician. They call him the musician. And he steals out of the courtyard, and on his way to a musical exam, he stops at a window, and there we begin to see the Tarkovsky elements. There's a mirror, right?
Indeed.
There's a mirror. He walks along a river, i.e. water.
Right.
In the mirror, he sees refracted apples falling on the ground, an image that is beautifully presented in the next real first film, Ivan's Childhood. There are other elements as well. The apples spilling on the ground, they're balloons, and I think that that's a sort of internal reference to the film that influenced them. Right. You know, they've acknowledged this. So he begins introducing this stuff right from the beginning, and as the film goes on, again, within the framework of a rather standard narrative, good worker, he's a very good worker, right? Good proletarian. Within that standard narrative, there are these other elements. And one of them, I think most importantly, is the primacy of art in human affairs and the meaning of art in human affairs. And it's personified by the boy and his violin and the music that he plays.
I'm interested in the way in which the film admits certain kinds of flaws, works in progress, as it were, about the society that's being portrayed. So while, you know, the steamroller driver is portrayed in virtually exclusively positive terms, it's just this, you know, nice, sensitive guy who's responsible about his work, etc. On the other side, I mean, you have to have some dramatic tension for there to be a need for the bonding between the two. And you do see, you know, the mean-spirited kids. They're kids, but they're pretty mean-spirited. We see also the sense of pretty vicious competition within the world of arts training itself. And of course, this another Tarkovskian motif that returns through film is this tense relationship with a mother.
It's interesting you mentioned that. You know, Tarkovsky has been accused of misogyny in the film Nostalgia, for example. He has a priest telling a woman the function of women is to bear children, to be patient, to sacrifice, and to bear children. Now, I'm not sure that that's Tarkovsky's own philosophy.
Well, exactly.
But it is interesting. There are several women in the film. And you could make a case that he is hostile to women. Mama is very, very severe and strict and locks him in the room, won't let him go out.
Indeed.
The music instructor is a stereotypical Soviet Miss Grundy. As she negates everything he's doing. Too much imagination. Try it again. Let's do it again. And her aura is one of authority. And as with all Soviet films, you can always read into them symbolically. Now, we know that Tarkovsky hated to be known as a symbolist. He was very, very concrete,
Absolutely.
right? But does she represent Soviet authority? Does she represent the state versus art? We're free to make those interpretations, are we not?
Oh, I think,
Right?
yeah, I think there are certain, unlike other Tarkovsky films, and this is going to bring it back, this actually partakes of, yes, the humanism of the moment and all that, but there are allegorical elements
yes, indeed. Yeah,
to the film, and this conflict within the culture between the pragmatic, the building the great Moscow, the scenes of things coming down, the great future, but with that, a kind of animosity.
Oh, absolutely.
To the arts that we see, in the kids, grabbing his violin, that we see in the over strictness of the teacher.
That's all
cultural
there.
conflict.
Yeah, that's all there. By the way, there is that wonderful moment where he leaves his violin in the
Steamroller.
the backside of the steamroller. So that's again a nice sort of collaboration, and the kids find it. And you expect that they're going to take it out and break it up, but they stand in awe of it.
Yeah.
The power of art to overcome violence, right? I think that's the essential element. You mentioned something else which is interesting in the film, and again, it could be read in two different directions. That bravura scene, he's showing off here. This is a student film, and he's showing off what he can do. Suddenly it starts raining, there's lightning, there's thunder, starts raining, the wrecking ball begins bashing up against the walls. How do we interpret that scene? Is it the Moscow that's going to be that represents the future? Or is it the Moscow, the traditional Russian Moscow, that is being destroyed in the name of Khrushchevian progress, right? So, I would guess that Tarkovsky intends that to be read both ways. It satisfies the film bosses. He's showing the reconstruction of Moscow, the progress, the future, and so on. At the same time, he's also suggesting, hey, what are we destroying? And if you look closely in that scene, you see a church, and you see church domes in the background. And I think he's making a point there. Let me just come back to this issue of the women. So there is two women characters who are unpleasant, Mama and the music teacher. And then there's another woman who is a competitor for the workers' affections, right? And she wins out in the end. It's she who goes to see Chapayev with him.
At the movies, right?
Yeah. So is there anything countervailing that? Yeah. In the opening scene at the conservatory, the little boy comes out and he's very, very disappointed. He only got a B. Actually, in the Russian, he got a 4. They mark on a scale of 1 to 5. Okay. So it's an A minus, right? And she comforts him. And that's the Tarkovskian image of the mother. Comforting the little boy in his pain. And that we see in other films as well. So, I don't buy the argument of misogyny so easily, although you could make a case that the women characters in the film, for the most part, are negative. There's another element involved, and this is an autobiographical dimension. Tarkovsky's father, the famous poet Arsény, separated from his mother when he was just a boy. And here in the film, we don't see any papa around. Right. And the steamroller driver is a kind of surrogate papa, I think, is the implication.
Well, how should I put this? Within a very controlled and confined way, this is, an imperfect Moscow of the 1960s. The critique is not going to be obviously a large systemic critique.
Yeah.
You're not going to satirize bureaucracy or anything like that. But the whole question of private or human happiness is both, evoked in the film. What are the paths available to this? And we see, considerable imperfection.
Yeah, no question about that. But Tarkovsky is not interested in those big political issues.
Yeah.
Like figures of his generation. Yelem Klimov, for example, was interested in those issues. Panfilov was interested in those issues, and their films were banned as a consequence. He really wasn't interested in those big political issues. He was interested in sort of old-fashioned considerations of art and the spirit. And he thought the purpose, his book, by the way, is worth reading, although it's very, very foggy.
Yeah. Like Sculpting in Time.
Sculpting in Time, which is like his films, actually. But he makes some statements in there that I think are consistent with what he's doing on the screen. That art should enhance the spirit. It should deepen spiritual values, and that's the function of the artist. And that's the kind of thing he's concerned with. And of course, a whole series of subtopics, time and its passage. He defines film as sculpting in time. Right. The idea of the image placed within the context of time and stripping away everything else unconnected to it, the way a statue is created, say. That's what he's interested in. He's interested in human generosity and what impedes it. He's interested in children and a childlike view of the world. He defined himself in another very good documentary about him, by the way, done by the editor of the film The Sacrifice, called directed by Andrei Tarkovsky.
Which is on the DVD of The Sacrifice. No, yeah. Of The Sacrifice. If you have the DVD of The Sacrifice, Tarkovsky's film, that documentary is one of the special features on it. So one can see it, one has access to it in that way.
Terrific. And there he says that he's always viewed the world as a child does, not intellectually. Not as a mature person. He relates to it in a very, very physical way, as a child would. And you see that reflected in his films, beginning with Steamroller and Violin. That scene, I think the high point, of course, of the film, there are a lot of sort of little epiphanies throughout the film.
Right.
But I think the high point of the film is that moment, and it brings together all the Tarkovskian elements. He's in a kind of courtyard, and the steamroller driver, whose name is Sergei, Seryoja, asks him to play. And he begins to play, and the camera focuses in close-up, I think, on this magnificent Russian face of the actor, Zamansky, I think his name is. Those high cheekbones, those deep-set blue eyes, a square jaw, and he is moved by the music. Here is this guy who drives a steamroller, and he is absolutely moved by the music, the power of art to communicate and to reach deep within everyone's soul, be he a blue-collar worker or an intelligent. And then there are other elements in that scene. There's shimmering, the light is shimmering all the time. There's a puddle, a pebble falls into the puddle or is thrown into the puddle. So I think that's the quintessential Tarkovskian moment in the film, if you ask me.
No, and I did. So we've just got a minute or so left. So how do you said a little bit of this earlier, but what do we make of Tarkovsky in the history of Russian film and the history really of post-war film. I mean, after World War II. What do you think is?
Well, you know, he stands apart. He stands so much apart from the traditions of Soviet cinema, even in their bolder moments, that it's hard. It's almost hard to say that he's a Soviet filmmaker. On the other hand, who could have made Andrei Rublev? Can you imagine Louis B. Mayer, signing off on Andrei Rublev? Who could have done that? So yeah, it's fascinating. He's a Soviet filmmaker in terms of what's spread out before him, the things that are made available to him. Stalker, for example, ran into some technical problem after it was filmed entirely, something to do with the emulsion or something, and he filmed it entirely from scratch. You could do that. They weren't concerned about, so much as box office receipts and the bottom line. So in that sense, he's a Soviet filmmaker, and he's also a Soviet filmmaker, I think, in the best side of Soviet ideology, the humanism, the concern for humanity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think stylistically and in so much of what he does, he stands really uniquely apart. And as for world cinema, well, that Bergman said that Tarkovsky is the world's greatest filmmaker.
Well, we're gonna have to end there, but it's a nice quote, quote to end with. Right. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, or more generally about CUNY TV, it should come as no surprise that the best place to get it is on our website. Please visit us at www.cuny.TV. You'll find a pull-down menu, lots of places to click on, and you'll find also ways to communicate with us by, again, no surprise, by email. Again, that address is www.cuny.tv. Professor Menashe, always a pleasure to have you here.
And always a pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. And I hope that you join us and have some pleasure in watching the films that we'll be showing in coming weeks on City Cinematheque. In any case, thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye for now.